What it's really about, like I say, is freedom of conscience. And Mike L. Stainer, over and over again in the books, really kind of lays down what my ultimate position is, which is that ultimately every human being has to decide what he or she believes. That until you actually make that decision one way or the other, rather than just, oh yeah, well that's what mom and dad taught me, or that's what my professor taught me, or whatever, you're not discharging your responsibility to yourself, whether or not you are discharging your responsibility to an omnipotent deity that may or may not exist. Okay. And that's why Stainer, I don't know if you've gotten in the Safehold books to the scene where he's talking with, where Stainer is actually talking with Iris Dakin, the Prince of Khorasan's daughter.
Okay.
And she is thinking about coming over to the Church of Cheris. And he says to her, I can't tell you what to decide. And he says, I would love to see you over here. But if you cannot give everything you have to it, okay, if you can't commit to it, then don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it will cause you so much pain. Okay. Now he knows things that he can't tell her at that point.
Right.
That are involved in supporting the Church of Cheris ultimately. But that's really his view all the way through the books. And his brother, the Rock Point, Dominic Stain,
mm-hmm.
isn't really sure God exists at all. When he learns the truth. I mean, when he's sailing into battle, and it's this big night battle, and he knows bunches of his people are going to get killed and everything else. Basically, what he's saying, God, if you exist, okay, I'm not asking you to look after me, look after my men. And you've got all different gradations. The head of the Royal College basically settles into kind of a deist mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Stainer, for all intents and purposes, becomes a Christian, even though he has to, he's doing it through the filter of the Safeholdian experience. Okay?
Right.
And so what I'm saying in the end is that when it comes to religion, every one of us is an individual of equal value. Okay, I believe that firmly. And I believe that because of my belief in God, as well as the fact that I was raised in a pluralistic Western society. But what ultimately underscores that for me is my belief in a God who created all of us and would kind of like us to get along. Okay, I mean, I got 3 kids. I really hate it when they're hitting each other over the head. That's on an individual basis. And the individual ultimately must take responsibility for her own decisions. Just as you have to take responsibility for your own actions, which is something, sadly, we're kind of out of the practice of doing as a society these days. But you have to own the responsibility for your actions or your inactions, either one. Okay? But they come out of what you believe. So therefore you have to own responsibility for what you believe. It's not enough to say, but this is what everybody taught me. Okay? Unless in the process of telling you they completely cut you off from anything that might have told you, you know what, that's really not such a great thing to be doing.
Right.
Blowing up skyscrapers, not so good, kind of thing. But that's on what I think of as the micro level, the level of individuals' relationship with God and what they believe or don't. But then there's the macro level, where you deal with historical institutions and entities that are going to impinge on politics and whatnot. I got really pissed off with the Episcopal Church many, many, many years ago when I was probably only in my 20s. Because I thought that they had gotten more interested in being on the right side of current political issues rather than reading the operator's manual. Okay? So I got mad at God because, after all, I knew him through the Episcopal Church. I said, I'll show you. I'm walking away from the church. And God was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm real impressed with that. It's kind of like, yeah, you'll be back. I can wait. I'll be here, kind of thing. So where do I go when I go back to organized religion? Methodism, which was created as a revivalist social reform movement within the Anglican Church in the 18th century. God has a sense of humor. Okay? And again, it's where do you go to find that organized structure? How do the members of that organized structure hold it to accountability? And what do you do when a structure which sets out to control not simply human beings' actions, but their thoughts goes off the rail? It doesn't have to be a church that does it.
Mm-hmm.
Political ideologies can do that. God knows we've seen enough of that lately in the U.S., but I mean, if you want to go back and look at the 30s and the 40s, all right, and you have people who are just as doctrinaire in the 60s and the 70s and the 90s and the 2000s. And then you just disengage your brain entirely and just coast right along the rails of whatever ideology it is you've signed up for. And that, to me, is the ultimate rejection of your responsibility as a human being. And that's really what the Safehold books are about. Now, they're undergirt by my own religious beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I've never pretended that they aren't. I'm one of those people who does not see a fundamental conflict between religion and science. I'm one of those people who believes that it's perfectly okay for your religious principles to help you determine what your political principles are, just as it is to allow any other philosophical principle to do it. And I'm one of those people who believes that no religion on the face of the earth has the right to compel anyone who doesn't subscribe to it to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're looking at a political equation where you're making decisions that are going to govern society as a whole, I think that if you are someone whose religious principles tell you, no, I can't go there, that you have every right to stand up in the political process and try and get enough people to agree with you to vote that we're not going there.
Mm-hmm.
If society as a whole votes that we are going there, then you as a religious person have the right to not go there along with them. But you can't tell somebody else that he can't, and you can't ignore the laws that are enacted. That's what that whole bit about Christ and the coin is about. When they're trying to get him to say something actionable about, no, you shouldn't be paying those Romans what they want, so the Romans will kind of take him off the board for them. He says, give me a coin. And he looks at it and says, whose picture is this on? They say Caesar's. And he says, okay, give Caesar's what's Caesar's and give God what's God's. Okay? But it goes a lot deeper than that. Okay? And Christians really throughout history have been called upon to be vanguards of reform on the one hand, and on the other hand to recognize that they live in a society where there are going to be requirements of the secular government, the secular state, that are going to have to be complied with. And that, unless you reach a point where it is literally one of those spiritual sort of life and death issues, you're supposed to find a way to not disrupt everything around you while still maintaining your fidelity to your core belief. Now, frankly, maintaining fidelity to your core beliefs is more important, which is why Christians were so heavily involved in the Underground Railway during pre-Civil War days, why Christians were so heavily involved in the civil rights issues in the 60s. And that's an example of my faith, my principles require me to do something about this problem. And I can't do something about it maybe too much as an individual, but if I get together with, 40 or 50,000 of my closest friends,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we may be able to make a difference. And that's exactly what Cheris, or Keris, depending on how you want to pronounce it, is doing on Safehold. Caleb, when he originally said, more or less, "Here I stand," this isn't clear in the books, but he really and truly had not read Martin Luther when he said that for the first time. He has since,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and he has essentially adopted that as the motto of the House of Armagh. That will be the motto of the House of Armagh from here on out. But it sums up my belief about that whole responsibility taking, about deciding what you believe, about saying, you know, I ain't budging from this position. And whether or not ultimately, one of the things that any person of faith has to recognize is that other people of faith aren't going to agree 100% with him.
Mm-hmm.
That other religions are going to teach different things, and that is going to set him or her at odds with those other religions. And so then you get into that fine point, okay, of where is "here I stand"? Where's that going to conflict? And what do you do when it does? And that's exactly what people have been doing on Safehold for 12 books now, 9 books, I guess. They've been deciding where they stand, and they've been living and dying for what they believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? My theory is that God can't ask much more than that out of you. Okay? And I firmly believe, although the original quote kind of goes back to the Albigensian Crusades, I truly believe that God will know his own. Okay? Whether there's a wonderful, wonderful passage in C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle. And it's Aslan, who is basically, if you read the books, Aslan is Christ. Okay, and then there's Tash, who is basically the devil. And there's this young Calorman, and they worship Tash. And he winds up face to face with Aslan. And he's like, "Oh, I am so going to die." Okay, you know, but he sees Aslan. He recognizes when he sees Aslan, you know, this magnificent, you know, presence and so forth. But he doesn't say, "I didn't mean it." Okay, he says, "All my life I have worshipped Tash, you know, and therefore you must hate me." And Aslan says to him, this is a paraphrase, but it says to him basically, "Don't you understand that you can do nothing bad validly in my name, and you can do nothing good validly in his name? Those who have acted in accordance with my teachings, with my whatever, they're mine, whoever they thought they were worshiping." Okay? And people who called themselves mine, but did all this crap that I don't approve of, that burned people to death because of their sexual orientations or whatever, they may think they're mine, but they're not. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's kind of at the crux of what this is all about. It does seem to be part of the human condition that we need identifiers. They're us, and they're them. Okay? And there's a tendency to make those designations without frequently really understanding the them at all.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, you darn betcha, Skippy, we're us and they're them. Okay? And sometimes that's on religious grounds. sometimes it's on political grounds. I mean, I would really like to think that in 1943 we had a pretty fair grasp of we're us and they're Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
But look at our Russian allies. Okay, so it's not as clear cut as it can be. But human beings look for that sorting lens to tell them who's on their side and who's for them and who's against them.
Right.
Okay. And the problem with doing that on the basis of religion is that, well, if you're not for me, then you're against God. And if you're against God, you are out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It makes it much easier if you think God himself or herself is standing at your shoulder and saying they don't deserve to live, to pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I see happening in kind of a political sense in the U.S. today, but which, has been, I'm sure, that Charleon says in one of the Safehold books, surely God weeps to see his children killing each other. And that's because I'm pretty sure he does.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish that after, 4,000 or 5,000 years, we can kind of get it through our heads, but then I wouldn't have any Honor Harrington novels to write.